Okay, so beginning the lecture today, we are going to talk about drugs. Actually, we're going to talk about the drugs that lower the level of the lipids in the body. So, when I'm looking at the entire lipid scenario in particular, there is a few things that this one paper can teach us when it comes to the lipid metabolism. And definitely, this image I will upload uh, somewhere else on probably the Telegram or on the Google Drive, probably. But what is important is that we need to understand the three steps that are essential when it comes to fatty acid metabolism. So, there is first called fatty acid oxidation. The way I look at it is I want to look at fatty acid oxidation first and then synthesis. Because in one way or the other, your oxidation is going to release or is going to cause a decrease in the fatty acid levels in your body. So it's important to understand how the oxidation occurs. So I'll be highlighting it. And sorry for the bad quality, but this is the fatty acid oxidation, the first step that I have highlighted. There is a fatty acid, all right, there is a fatty acid. And if I am to write probably at the side of the screen, this is your fatty acid. And your fatty acid is going to be converted into fatty acid or your acyl adenylate. All right, so let's say there's a chain fatty acid and there are acids around, and COH and stuff like that. What's going to happen is that you're first going to use thiokinase and you're going to phosphorylate this and you're going to make it acyl adenylate. Then what you're going to do is that you will convert it into fatty acyl CoA. What that basically is that a coenzyme A, which is basically vitamin B5 pantothenic acid, is going to be added to this fatty acyl adenylate, and this fatty acid adenylate that is out here, all right, that is going to be converted into fatty acyl CoA, so that this fatty acyl CoA can now go into the mitochondria with the help of another transporter called as fatty acyl carnitine. So acyl carnitine is a transporter protein that is one of the most important steps when it brings the fatty acid into the mitochondria. Once it's inside the mitochondria, the acyl CoA, obviously you need to think about it as nothing can the most important step in getting a fatty acid is getting it to an acyl CoA step. So what usually happens is that the first step, where we are looking at it as an acyl adenylate, is skipped. We don't really talk about that. We just say that there's fatty acid, all right, and then we make it a fatty acid acyl CoA, and we say that there is two steps occurring, like a multi-enzyme step. One, there is a thiokinases TK, that's how I write it, and there's also your acyl CoA or B5 that is added. All right, so far so good. So once the acyl CoA is formed, the acyl CoA has to go inside the mitochondria as shown here. It goes inside the mitochondria as acyl carnitine with the help of the carnitine transporter, where I have ticked. All right, if I can, let me use crayon instead. So this acyl carnitine step out here, once it's inside the mitochondria, the oxidation begins. And the way I like to remember it is that first there is dehydrogenation, then there is hydrolase, again there is a dehydrogenation, and then there's a thiolase. The end product is that you will have another acyl CoA and one chain less acetyl CoA. So basically, two carbon compound will be released. A two carbon compound will be released out here, and that would enter your Krebs cycle, correct? So that is your acetyl CoA. So the basic step is that you have a fatty acid, you make it an acyl CoA, you send it inside the mitochondria with the carnitine transporter. Once you've got it inside the mitochondria with the help of the carnitine transporter, you you first dehydrogenase it, so you make it a transenol CoA, then you hydroxylate it to make it a beta hydroxyacyl CoA, and then you again dehydrogenase it to make it a beta ketoacyl CoA, and again you will have acetyl CoA. Now, fatty acid synthesis is something that's not appreciated, but it is of essential value, because in any of these alpha or beta oxidation pathways, and even in the synthesis, if it's incorrect, let's say you have less of fatty acids, you could have toad skin, phrynoderma. If you have an effect in alpha disease, alpha oxidation, you could have Refsum's disease. If there's beta oxidation defect, you could have sudden infant death syndrome after breastfeeding. So no matter how it's no matter how we see it, but it's a very important step. So when we're looking at the entire step out here, this is when I've drawn this in the fatty acid synthesis. Now let's come to the fatty acid synthesis. For that, we'll use the blue color crayon, and I'm highlighting it with a crayon. And this is your fatty acid synthesis, and this is occurring inside your mitochondria. So you are converting pyruvate to acetyl CoA, and that's very important, correct? Obviously. But what is the starting step? When you think about what is the starting step, what that was there for the oxidation, obviously your acyl CoA was there, so there has to be a CoA. So the rule is that have a CoA with you. So what happens is that you want to transport the acyl CoA, but you can't transport it because it's not permeable to the mitochondrial membrane. So what you do is that you convert the acyl CoA to a citrate, which is fine, right? You have an oxaloacetate, it binds to citrate, it comes out. The citrate is out, it again goes back into the oxaloacetate. From the oxaloacetate into the malate, from the malic enzyme again it goes into pyruvate, and pyruvate could enter back in. All right, that's the basic procedure, because most of the steps of the Krebs cycle are reversible. What is important is to know is that this oxaloacetate to malate step is important, because when you do citrate lyase, okay, when you have a citrate, obviously you're going to break into acetyl CoA and oxaloacetate. So you cannot have an oxaloacetate left out in the mitochondria, in the cytoplasm. You need to push it back in so that the Krebs cycle is not affected. So to transfer your oxaloacetate into malic or into your malate, you have an enzyme called as malic acid, and this is the enzyme that uses NADPH. So without NADPH, obviously this step is not going to occur. All right, so malate, and then malate can directly go in. Malate is quite permeable, as we all know. We've seen that in gluconeogenesis as well, correct? That malate leaves the mitochondrial membrane and comes into the cytoplasm. Now once the acyl CoA is there out here, we use an acyl CoA carboxylase, and any carboxylase reaction, most of them are by biotin, except your methyl carboxylase, which is not by biotin. All right, so once your acyl CoA is carboxylated, you have malonyl CoA, and then these acyl CoA and malonyl CoA join, and they rejoin again and again to form a fatty acid. And that's like, getting into the details of it is not that important. But if you want to know, obviously it's going to be the reverse of the entire oxidation, like beta ketoacyl. Next was your hydroxyacyl, beta hydroxyacyl, then transenol, acyl CoA, and then palmitate, or whatever, depending upon the chain. So that's the fatty acid. And now when you're looking at the triacid glycerol, all right, it has 3 fatty acids and 1 glycerol. So what happens to the glycerol part? Well, glycerol phosphate or glycerol kinase comes in and makes a glycerol 3 phosphate. Now this glycerol 3 phosphate, all right, can undergo dehydrogenation and become DHAP. That could enter your gluconeogenesis and give rise to a lot of energy and give good energy sources. Or you could use it as lysophosphatidic acid, make it a phosphatidic acid, or whatever. All right, so basically if you have a glycerol and you want to go back into the degradative pathway, you want to go into a DHAP, and the DHAP is going to take you back into glycerol 3 kinase and stuff like that. Glycerol 3 DHAP, and then you can go into using an aconitase into glucose 3 phosphate and stuff like that. But let's say if you have your glycerol 3 phosphate, and now again you want to synthesize something out of it, like a phosphatidic acid, you could obviously do that. All right, and then coming to the very important step, that is your cholesterol synthesis. The thing about cholesterol synthesis is that it's very similar to ketone bodies, You use two acetyl CoA, you make a HMG CoA lyase. So acetyl CoA, then you make an HMG CoA. Usually your HMG CoA step out here till here is the same, where you use an HMG CoA synthase and you use a thiolase and you form HMG CoAs. After this step, the difference actually occurs that you have an HMG CoA reductase. And this HMG CoA reductase is going to make your mevalonate, and from mevalonate you're going to make your cholesterol by just adding another acetyl CoA, or probably just making changes into the number of phosphates or adding carbon compounds to it. Now, why we are going into the depth of these reactions is because this HMG CoA reductase, this very important enzyme that we have out here, or this badass enzyme that is the one that is giving rise to such high levels of cholesterol, can be directly inhibited by something like a statin. All right, and then we have something which is your basic citrate breaking enzyme, that is ATP citrate lyase, that can be inhibited by something called as your bempedoic acid. Correct? So we can use this so clearly and so easily that bempedoic acid can be used, and that kind of gives you a feeling that, you know what, it's not that difficult, the entire process. Well, before we get into the lipoprotein metabolism, it's important to understand what's the difference between the cholesterol and the ketone bodies. So when you're looking out here, there is two acetyl CoA, same as cholesterol, acetoacetyl CoA with thiolase out here, and then you have an HMG CoA lyase, acetoacetyl CoA, and beta hydroxy butanone is formed, and that goes to the brain. And again, the same step occurs, and you have your NADH that's present. You have your acetoacetyl CoA, and you will make your two acetates. So far so good. So so the only difference where it occurs is that from your HMG CoA, instead of going into your acetoacetate, it does not go into acetoacetate because there is no HMG CoA lyase. Rather, it goes into your mevalonate because of your reductase, and that reductase can be inhibited by your statin group of drugs. All right, getting that cleared with, let's look at a few lipoprotein metabolism to begin with. All right, so you have a GIT, the gastrointestinal tract. You take fats, you take lipase. Your fat lipase are broken down into triacylglycerol, your cholesterol, free fatty acid if you want. And once you have that, it's all put into a micelle. The bile salt is covering it, and it goes into the enterocyte. When it goes into the enterocyte, you have chylomicrons. So they come into as chylomicrons, correct? Now these chylomicrons that enter, they basically are broken. All right, they are broken down as triacylglycerols, as monoacylglycerols, or triacylglycerols, or then biacylglycerols and one fatty acid, monoacylglycerols and two fatty acids, and stuff like that, plus cholesterol, obviously. So what happens is that it goes into the rough endoplasmic reticulum out here, as we can see, the rough endoplasmic, and it adds ApoB48 to these chylomicrons. So ApoB48 is an important indicator. So it adds ApoB48, and from the lymphs it goes into the vessels. So far so good. All right, so once it's in the vessels, there is ApoB48. It's going to get ApoC2, ApoE, and ApoA. From where? From your HDL. So the HDL is kind of a donor, if you want to think about it. He is the wiki donor. He's going to give his ApoC2, he's going to give his ApoA, he's also going to give his ApoE, and he make chylomicron super happy. So HDL is wiki donor. That's how I remember it. And then it goes and it sticks to lipase, and it goes probably to the peripheral, parts of the body, like your adipocyte, or for instance your muscles, or wherever. And the lipase, it holds on to the ApoB48. And what it does is that it breaks down the triacylglycerol and it reduces the normal levels of triacylglycerol. Alright? Correct or not? So it breaks down the normal level of triacylglycerol. And once the normal levels of triacylglycerol reduce, it goes to the liver as a chylomicron remnant. Okay, the chylomicron remnant is picked up by an LDL receptor because of the ApoE. And what it does is that in the liver, it pushes up the number of triacylglycerol, it increases the cholesterol in that one chylomicron remnant. As you can see out here, that in this stage, your chylomicron remnant has come, but it's the liver is like, no, bro, you take more cholesterol, you take more TG, and we're going to transfer microsomal TAG transfer protein is going to add some TAG to you, and you just dip from here again. And they will add another protein to it, and they're going to add ApoB100, and this is going to be a VLDL. Now, your VLDL will go, and again, you have a lipase, and it will again bind to the lipase with the help of ApoB100. Your wiki donor is going to give us ApoE, C2A, जो उसको देना है देगा. And again, it's going to come with a reduced level of TAG. Now, your TAG is low. Alright, your TAG levels are low. Okay, that's important to understand. So what's going to happen is that your VLDL remnant is going to come and again it's going to bind to the LDL receptor. See, it's not just an LDL receptor. So it's basically an LDL receptor is going to bind to anything that has an ApoE. Okay, it's going to bind to the LDL receptor with the ApoE, and again it's going to enter. Alright, now a VLDL remnant can again enter, and again with the help of your microsomal TAG transfer protein again go and again give a little bit of TAG to the parts where your energy is needed. But is that what we want? Well, after VLDL, the lipase has occurred. That's not just VLDL, it's called something called as LDL. Alright, that is nothing but LDL. So what I'm saying is, that if there is a cholesterol and triacylglycerol, alright, and there's a lipoprotein lipase, okay, there's going to be IDL. You could form an IDL. With VLDL metabolism, you form an IDL. And now when this IDL reaches the hepatic lipase, alright, to remove the TAG, is going to form an LDL. How do I explain it? How could I make it simpler? Well, think about it in this sense. A chylomicron, first lipase, he comes back as a remnant. And he's pushed out as a VLDL. Now the VLDL, alright, now what happens is that the VLDL is going again in the blood, and it's again lipoprotein is acted on it, so it forms your IDL. Alright, now your IDL is having very less amount of triacylglycerol. Alright, because your VLDL had some amount of triacylglycerol. Now that's gone, so you have an IDL. Now let's say there's one more hepatic lipase. Now your IDL is taken up, and the lipase acts again that the liver needs certain amount of triacylglycerol, so you will convert it into an LDL, or even a lipoprotein lipase that's in the adipose, heart, brain, anywhere, and you would make it another IDL. So that's how it works. Now coming to the fat adipocytes, you have fats and you have an hormone sensitive lipase. Obviously you know that insulin is very inhibits the hormone sensitive lipase, so you will have free fatty acid plus glycerol that is being formed, which could again form triacylglycerol, and this enters the blood, free fatty acid and glycerol, and then reaches the liver, and again it's used in the production of chylomicrons. All right, and this is what I'm talking about. And then there's one more very important step. Okay, there's one more very important step where I'm saying is that what happens to the IDL and the LDL is that LDL has ApoB100, all right, and LDL also has an ApoB100. Remember that always. And the thing about it, what is better in an IDL is that the IDL, instead of having it does have an ApoE, number one. It also has an Apo C2, and the LDL is actually attached to the blood vessels, so that's kind of back, and it's risky. So LDL is obviously really risky. LDL receptors are present also in the muscles, so that's very important when it comes to um, LDL. And we've got a very important receptor called Niemann-Pick-like 1 receptor that actually takes in the cholesterol and adds the cholesterol to the chylomicrons with the help of acyl-CoA transporter. All right, so that's another very important MCQ that's there. So this is one way of completing this entire uh, lipoprotein chapter. And if you want we can talk about the different lipoproteins in terms of how much chylomicrons they have. So let's say we're talking about hyper let's say if we are saying that there is increased amount of chylomicrons. Okay, so let me just shade the chylomicron with blue, right? And let's take a lighter. So let's say chylomicron. So if there are increased chylomicrons, what's going to occur? So you'll have an increased TG, you'll have increased cholesterol. What is TG? TG is basically glycerol plus 3 fatty acids. Okay. If let's say there is a increase in LDL, all right, if there's an increase in LDL, so LDL has only cholesterol, so there's going to be increase in cholesterol. End of story. Let's say there is an increase in chylomicron, or if there's an increase in VLDL, all right. So what's going to increase? There's going to be increase in triglycerol, but more than that, there's going to be increase in cholesterol. End of story. So that's what I'm saying, that your different lipoproteins have different contents, and by the virtue of the contents, we can remember what treatment we should start. And we'll get into the treatment in the next lecture.